Welcome back to Switchstars, my name's Luke, and today on the channel we're checking out Seraph's Last Stand, an interesting little indie roguelike which sees you playing as a wizard and surviving for as long as possible against increasingly difficult waves of enemies. But how does it fare against other roguelikes? Does it have a well thought out gameplay loop? And will it have you hooked? Well, drop a like and subscribe if you enjoy my content and want to see more, and let's find out. So no storyline with this one then, but the game is supposedly based on a classic Flash era game called Heli Attack. Not one that I've personally played, but its inspirations are clear to see from the simplicity of its gameplay. Now I've seen some people comparing this one to Vampire Survivors, but aside from some of the upgrade mechanics, I personally fail to draw a comparison between the two. Seraph's Last Stand is a platformer which plays more like an arcade game. Its combat is shooting based and operates similar to a twin stick shooter, and rather than a constant stream of enemies, you'll be facing waves which increase in difficulty and numbers as the game goes on. Upon first starting the game though, you're presented with a main menu in which you get to select your loadout, and initially you're limited to a basic wizard's hat which provides no bonuses, and a simple staff which fires a single projectile, and we'll get onto the unlock system shortly which allows for more options and more varied gameplay styles, but first let's talk about the controls and basic gameplay mechanics. Now the controls are pretty simple, like I said, playing a little bit like a twin stick shooter with one thumbstick moving your character, the other aiming and the ZR button doing the shooting. Other than this, you only have a jump button to worry about, and herein lies my first criticism, as despite having 3 other shoulder buttons available, jumping is bound to the A button, which makes it near impossible to aim and shoot whilst jumping unless you've got some freakishly flexible fingers. Now this normally wouldn't pose much of an issue, but the game puts an emphasis on utilising jumping to avoid projectiles, and several of its power-ups even include upgrades to increase its height and add double and triple jumps to the mix. So to me it's a bit of a baffling design choice, and to make matters worse there are no key binding options, so you're stuck with it. Anyway, the objective in Seraph's Last Stand is to basically survive for as long as possible against growing waves of enemies. Each wave introduces additional enemy types as well as increased numbers of them, and the focus is on taking them down whilst also avoiding the torrents of bullets they're throwing your way. And I really mean torrents, as in the beginning things are relatively tame when you've only got a few enemies to deal with, but the game quickly descends into a bullet hell scenario, and avoiding all of them becomes a near impossible task. Luckily, between each wave you're presented with a selection of offensive and defensive upgrades to pick from, taken from a pool of upgrades which come in common or more powerful uncommon variants. Offensive ones include increases to your projectile damage, fire rate and crit chance, as well as a couple of options which supplement your damage, adding periodic lightning strikes or causing explosions when enemies die, while defensive ones see increases to your HP, defense and movement speed, and reductions to your character's size, making it easier to slip between gaps in bullets, as well as several ways to heal yourself, like life leech, regeneration and health pickups. Every 5 levels will grant you a unique legendary perk, including shields, drones which fire on enemies, and the ability to apply bleeds and slowdown effects. So all in all there's some decent variety to the upgrades, though it's nowhere near as versatile as those found in other roguelikes with very few synergies, and I found a few of them were also duds, so I usually found myself pushing for the same ones in each run. Depending on the rarity, power-ups will apply 1 to 3 stacks of it to you, which after a specific number will transform it, adding additional effects, like tripling the damage of your lightning strikes, making every first hit on enemies a guaranteed crit, or giving you a percentage chance that bullets will miss you entirely. But due to the RNG factor, I found it was often hard to acquire these upgrades. And while the game does allow you to reroll options at the cost of soul orbs, the same currency used for its unlock system, these have a very low chance to drop from enemies, and I mean very low, too low in my mind, and while there is an upgrade option which increases the drop rate of them, it's only by a measly 1%, and I found you can't really afford to take them in most runs. Now when it comes to the game's enemies, I have to admit I found them to be relatively generic. They include ranged variants which follow specific movement patterns but all fire directly at you, and I would have liked to have seen some of them fire in other directions and have different bullet patterns, not only just to add a bit more variety, but also to reduce the sheer number of bullets coming my way. There are a couple of melee variants to contend with, but these don't directly attack you and instead just follow you around and act more like bullet sponges, blocking your shots and generally just getting in the way and making it hard to deal with the real dangers. Similarly though, the game's arena also suffers from a distinct lack of variety here too, with there only being a single layout, and due to the game's enemies and finicky jumping mechanics, I didn't feel like I was able to fully utilise the play area. Heading up to the left side of it presents a much harder bullet angle to dodge and is a pain to get out of, with the melee variants often blocking your path, and to give myself the best chance of survival, I was usually confined to running back and forth across the large pit area on the right, occasionally using the stairs when I ran out of ground. Despite the issues that I've mentioned though, gameplay itself is enjoyable enough, and I found it equal parts frustrating and addictive, with it really easy to just dive in for one more run. And it's a lot more challenging than it looks, and getting to even wave 40 is definitely no easy feat. Now to touch on the permanent upgrades, the game offers a variety of hats which modify the mechanics slightly, giving you things like more armour but less speed, increasing drop rates and enemy frequency, or in the case of the fedora, removing the cost of rerolls, and I definitely recommend grabbing this one immediately. There are also a selection of staffs to unlock which change your projectile patterns and give you things like homing shots, explosive bullets or icicles which pass through enemies, but the one thing which surprised me the most was the lightning staff, as it completely changes the aiming mechanics, instead having you cast lightning strikes from above. But overall there's some nice variety to the unlocks, and they change up the gameplay enough to keep you pushing to unlock the next one. Each unlock though costs 25 soul orbs, and like I said, the drop rate is incredibly low and you'll be lucky to get 5 or 6 of them in a 40 wave run, so there's definitely a bit of a grind involved with this one. But in addition to the equipment unlocks, you can also purchase permanent stat upgrades, again for 25 orbs each, which include many of the defensive and offensive options found within the temporary run upgrades. When all's said and done though, Seraph's Last Stand is a fun enough roguelike to get stuck into, and it had me addicted enough to play for around 7 or so hours before writing this review. Its mechanics are reasonably solid bar a few of the upgrades, the jumping mechanics and its limited enemy lineup, but I did enjoy my time with it, and while Seraph's Last Stand doesn't offer quite the variety of a fully fledged roguelike, I'd say it's definitely well suited to those looking for an arcadey time filler game with a little sprinkle of roguelike progression to keep things interesting. Now when it comes to the visuals and audio, as you can see things are kept pretty simple, and in the latter waves when things get a bit tasty you'd be hard pushed to distinguish one enemy from another. The Steam version of the game does look to feature coloured enemies, but in the Switch variant everything is coloured white, including the level itself. But I've always been a firm believer that graphics don't make a game, and in the case of Seraph's Last Stand, this still rings true. In terms of performance, there are very few issues in the early levels with the game running smooth on the Switch, but getting beyond level 50 when you've got tons of projectiles and enemies exploding all over the place, the frame rate actually slows to a crawl and dodging anything becomes an impossibility, so without extremely strong defences, it's unlikely that you'll ever get to see any of the game's bosses. On the audio side of things, again, very simple. The sound effects are all decent, and we get a soundtrack which sits nicely in the background, but also evolves, becoming more intense as you reach certain waves, which I thought was a nice little touch. Overall, simple stuff, not game defining, but effective enough to get the job done. In conclusion then, Seraph's Last Stand is an enjoyable little arcade roguelike which keeps its mechanics relatively simple, allowing you to just pick up and play without any kind of tutorial, but it has just enough going for it to keep you hooked. And I'd say it serves well enough as a time filler title, but doesn't quite have enough depth to its progression to keep you playing for extended periods of time. It's a little bit janky, and the performance issues render your ability to progress indefinitely near impossible. But for what it is, I thought it was a well put together game. It had that addictive one more try feel to it, and its unlock system provided a decent amount of replayability and some much needed variety. And so when it comes to a rating, I'm going to be giving Seraph's Last Stand 3 out of 5 stars. If you're looking at picking Seraph's Last Stand up though, I recommend buying it off the US Switch eShop, as for some reason its pricing on there is a lot lower than the UK and EU equivalents. But with that said, hopefully this review helped you out and told you everything you need to know about the game, so let me know whether you're going to be picking it up down in the comments section below. As always, be sure to drop a like if you enjoyed this one and subscribe to the channel for more Switch content and reviews. But for now, thanks once again for watching, take care of yourselves and game on.